Today, we take a look at these deadly animals took revenge on hunters. From a fur trapper torn apart by a relentless wolf to two brothers on horseback fighting for survival as a bear mauls one of them.
On a moonless night in February 2018, the South African bush lay in an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional call of nocturnal creatures. Darkness enveloped the private game reserve near the edge of Kruger National Park, a sanctuary for wildlife and a dangerous frontier for those who sought to exploit it. Amid the shadows, three figures moved cautiously, their rifles slung across their backs, their movements deliberate. Among them was 50-year-old David Baloyi, a resident of Mavudza village in Mozambique. David's life, like many in his remote village, was one of hardship. Mavudza, situated in the Masengeri area, is a place of stark poverty where survival often depends on subsistence farming. Corn, cassava, peanuts, and rice grow in the sandy soils, yielding meager harvests. Most homes lack electricity, and opportunities for economic advancement are scarce. In a community where 3/4 of the population is illiterate, the illegal wildlife trade presents a tempting, albeit perilous, opportunity. David, like others before him, saw poaching as a way to provide for his family. The black market for animal products is lucrative. Rhino horn valued at more than gold, and lion bones sought after for traditional medicine and tiger wine in Asia fetch exorbitant prices. Though poachers only receive a fraction of the profits, the income can mean the difference between survival and starvation. David, along with two companions, crossed the border into South Africa, driven by desperation and the promise of easy money. Their destination was the Ubabat Game Reserve, a private sanctuary south of the Olifants River. The trio carried hunting rifles capable of taking down elephants, rhinos, or lions. With only basic butchery tools in tow, they planned to harvest whatever they could kill. But this wasn't their first foray into the bush. They knew the terrain and moved with confidence, avoiding flashlights to remain undetected by rangers. As the men crept through the dense undergrowth, they searched for signs of their prey. Stealth was essential, and their hearts pounded with the adrenaline of the hunt. The dry earth muffled their footsteps, but the sharp thorns of acacia trees scraped their arms as they pressed forward. The faint outline of tracks caught their attention, large paw prints in the dirt likely belonging to a lion. They whispered among themselves, crouching low as they examined the trail. But what they didn't realize was that something far deadlier was watching them. The African lion is a fearsome predator, responsible for hundreds of human fatalities each year. Males can grow up to 10 feet in length, including their tail, and weigh nearly 500 pounds. Their powerful jaws and sharp canines are designed to bring down prey much larger than themselves. While lions can hunt during the day, they are masters of the night. Their night vision is 6 to 8 times better than a human's, allowing them to stalk silently and strike with precision under the cover of darkness. As the poachers moved forward, they unknowingly ventured into the territory of a lion pride. The lions, perfectly attuned to the darkness, had the advantage. The men, blinded by the lack of moonlight, stumbled into a deadly trap. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. David let out a cry as a lioness struck him from the shadows, knocking him to the ground with immense force. His rifle discharged, the gunshot sounding through the bush. The lioness's powerful jaws clamped around his skull, her sharp canines puncturing bone. David screamed, thrashing and kicking as he tried to free himself. The two other men, paralyzed with fear, watched in horror as more lions emerged from the darkness, their golden eyes glowing menacingly. Panic overtook them. Dropping their weapons, they turned and ran, their hearts pounding as they fled through the bush. The sounds of David's cries and the growls of the lions faded behind them as they crashed through the undergrowth. Their flight was chaotic. They tripped over roots, tore through thorny branches, and didn't stop until they reached the perimeter fence. Only after scrambling to the other side did they pause to catch their breath. Their survival instincts had overridden everything else, leaving David behind to face the pride alone. Fearing legal consequences and the shoot-to-kill policies enforced by rangers, the two men chose not to seek help, knowing their actions could lead to severe punishment. Back at the scene, the lions continued their attack. For David, there was no escape. Asphyxiation and draining prey of its blood are the primary ways lions subdue their prey, and David was no exception. Within minutes, the predators had overpowered him. The pride fed in silence, their powerful jaws tearing through flesh and bone. The gunshot had alerted rangers who arrived at the scene hours later. What they found was gruesome. David's body had been almost entirely consumed, leaving only his head and scattered remains. Blood stained the ground where the lions had dragged their prey. Nearby, the abandoned rifles and ammunition confirmed the poachers' intent. Tracks in the dirt told the rest of the story. Two sets of footprints leading away from the scene, heading back toward the border. David's remains were transported to Maputha Malachi Hospital mortuary. His sister-in-law, who lived in South Africa, was called upon to formally identify him. The sight was devastating, and the trauma of that moment would stay with her forever. Back in Mozambique, David's family grieved his loss. For them, his death was a tragic consequence of poverty and desperation. The incident showed the deadly risks of poaching, not just from armed rangers, but from the animals themselves. Lions, despite being heavily poached for their bones, remain powerful predators capable of turning the tables on those who seek to exploit them. Conservationists and anti-poaching units pointed to the event as a gruesome reminder of the dangers posed by the illegal wildlife trade. On the night of April 1st, 2019, under the silver glow of a full moon, 4 men quietly made their way through the rugged undergrowth of South Africa's Kruger National Park. They were poachers, their objective as deadly as it was lucrative: to hunt a white rhinoceros. This endeavor promised immense profit as the illicit trade in rhino horn continues to fetch astronomical sums on the black market, particularly in Asia, where it is falsely believed to possess medicinal properties. Armed with hunting rifles and a sense of desperation, they slipped past the park's boundaries, unaware that their mission would soon take a gruesome turn. Malusi, the youngest of the group, was no stranger to these dangerous expeditions. The temptation of wealth and the lack of legitimate opportunities in his impoverished community had driven him to this life. Despite knowing the risks, armed rangers, wild animals, and the unforgiving terrain, he had taken the chance yet again. That night, as they crouched under acacia trees and strained their ears for the sounds of rhinos, the stillness of the bush was both their ally and their greatest threat. The group crossed through the park's boundary fence with precision, carefully cutting a hole just big enough to crawl through. They marked the entry point with a rock, ensuring they could find their way back. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, the night came alive with the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of unseen animals. Their senses were heightened, and every movement was deliberate. The men knew that rangers patrolled the area heavily, and any slip-up could mean imprisonment or worse. As they pressed on, Malusi noticed something in the dirt. Kneeling, he examined a large pile of fresh rhino dung. He whispered to his companions, pointing out the moist consistency that indicated the animal wasn't far. The group turned off their flashlights, following the faint trail of footprints illuminated by the moonlight. Anticipation built as the tracks led them closer to their quarry. The prospect of a successful hunt pushed them forward, their breaths quickening with each step. Then, just ahead, they spotted their target. A massive white rhino stood grazing in a clearing, its broad silhouette almost luminous in the moonlight. The creature was a majestic sight, standing 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing over 4,000 pounds. Its long, curved horn gleamed, a prize worth more than gold. Malusi raised his rifle, steadying his aim. His finger hovered over the trigger. But before he could fire, a deafening trumpet shattered the quiet. The men froze as the ground trembled beneath them. From the shadows emerged a massive bull elephant. Its ears flared and trunk raised in aggression. The elephant had been watching the intruders, its protective instincts triggered by their presence. With no warning, it charged. The poachers scattered, dropping their weapons as they fled. Malusi, intent on the rhino, was slow to react. By the time he turned, the elephant was upon him. It barreled into him with the force of a freight train, sending him flying through the air. He landed hard, his body crumpling on the unforgiving ground. Before he could process what had happened, the elephant charged again, its colossal foot coming down on his chest. The sickening sound of bones breaking echoed through the clearing as Malusi's screams pierced the night. The other poachers watched in horror from the safety of the bushes. They could see their companion lying motionless, the elephant looming over him. The massive animal shook its head, flapping its ears, and then retreated into the darkness. For a moment there was silence, broken only by Malusi's faint, labored breaths. The man emerged cautiously and rushed to his side. Malusi was alive, but barely. His breathing was shallow, each breath a painful struggle. His chest was visibly crushed, his ribs shattered. Knowing they couldn't leave him there, the group hoisted him up and began the arduous journey back. But in their panic, they lost their bearings. The dense bush, now a maze of shadows, offered no clear path. After what felt like hours of stumbling through the wilderness, they finally reached one of Kruger's tar roads. Exhausted and fearing capture by rangers, the men made a devastating decision. They left Malusi on the roadside and fled into the night. Alone and broken, Malusi lay under the moonlight, his wheezing breaths the only sound in the still air. The wilderness, however, is rarely silent for long. Predators lurk in the shadows, their sharp senses attuned to the faintest sign of weakness. As Malusi drifted in and out of consciousness, the cricket's chorus was interrupted by something far more sinister. The rustling of grass, the snap of a twig, unseen eyes glinted in the dark. A lion pride had caught Malusi's scent. Drawn by the blood and sound of his labored breathing, they crept closer, their padded feet silent against the earth. The first lioness approached cautiously, her golden eyes fixed on the helpless man. In an instant, she lunged, her powerful body pinning him down as her jaws closed around his throat. Malusi's struggle ceased as the pride descended upon him, their hunger overriding any hesitation. By morning, rangers were alerted to the incident when Malusi's accomplices contacted his family, relaying the news of the attack. A search party was dispatched, led by Regional Ranger Don English. Over the course of 3 days, the team scoured the area hoping to recover Malusi's remains. Eventually, they made a grim discovery near Crocodile Bridge. All that was left of him was a skull and a pair of torn trousers, his body completely devoured by the lions. Nearby, the rangers found discarded hunting rifles and ammunition, clear evidence of the group's intentions. The surviving poachers were later arrested and charged with illegal possession of firearms, conspiracy to poach, and trespassing. Their capture shed light on the harsh realities of poaching, where greed collides with unpredictable forces, leaving devastation in its wake. On the morning of March 23, 2024, the sun had just begun to cast its golden light over the snow-covered woods of Georgetown, California. The air was crisp and the silence of the wilderness wrapped around two brothers as they made their way deeper into the forest. Talon and Wyatt Brooks were no strangers to these woods, having spent countless hours hunting and camping here since they were children. Their father, a seasoned outdoorsman, had taught them not only how to track and hunt, but also how to survive in the wild, lessons that had shaped them into skilled hunters. That morning, the brothers set out on an expedition to collect shed antlers and hunt wild boar, a task they looked forward to each year. It was early spring, and while the land was still cloaked in snow, the boars were plentiful, and the antlers lay scattered among the trees. With their backpacks filled with supplies and a bond that only years of shared brotherly experiences could create, they ventured into the wilderness, unaware of the danger that lay ahead. The campsite they chose was familiar, tucked away just off the road where they could camp under the thick canopy of pine trees. They spent the afternoon setting up their camp, joking and laughing as they prepared for a quiet night under the stars. Dinner was a simple affair, cooked over an open flame with enough food to last them through the night. Though their father wasn't with them on this trip, the brothers were more than capable of handling themselves. It wasn't the first time they had ventured out alone. After eating, the brothers set out to hunt, knowing that the boars would be active as the sun began to set. Within a couple of hours, they had successfully downed one boar and found a few prime antlers to collect. They spent the rest of the afternoon dressing the boar and hauling it back to camp. Unbeknownst to the brothers, the smell of the hunt, a mix of fresh meat and blood, carried through the forest, leaving an open invitation to any predators in the area. As the night fell, the brothers cleaned up at a nearby stream, then retired to their tent to sleep, unaware that the aftermath of their hunt had drawn the attention of a hungry cougar. The beast had been prowling the area, its sharp eyes catching the scent of the carcass. It had waited until darkness settled, slipping into the shadows near the camp. The faint sounds of the brothers' voices and the warmth of the fire were enough to make the cat hesitant, but the hunger gnawing at its belly urged it forward. The cougar had lingered in the woods all night, watching the camp from a distance, its instincts driving it closer and closer to the prize. But when Wyatt stepped out of the tent in the early morning to relieve himself, the predator saw its chance. Stealthily, it crept through the underbrush, closing in on the unsuspecting brothers. Talon and Wyatt had no idea they were being stalked. As they made their way back toward the woods, the cougar remained silent, moving stealthily in the shadows. The brothers, focused on the path ahead, noticed nothing unusual. But then, in a split second, the cougar leapt from its hiding place, its powerful body crashing into Wyatt. With deadly precision, it raked its claws across his face, leaving deep gashes that tore through flesh and bone. Wyatt screamed in pain, but before he could react, the cougar was on top of him, its teeth sinking into his cheek and neck. Talon, who had been just a step ahead, rushed to his brother's aid. He threw down his rifle and, with the strength of desperation, lunged at the beast. His body collided with the cougar, knocking it off his brother and sending it tumbling through the air. In the chaos, Talon shouted at Wyatt to run. Blood poured from his brother's face, and his left eye was all but lost. Stumbling, disoriented and half-blind, Wyatt ran for the camp, leaving a trail of blood in the snow behind him. In his panic, he managed to grab a phone and dial 911, though his hands were slick with his own blood and his vision blurred. Talon fought with the mountain lion, trying to keep it away from his brother, but his efforts were in vain. The cougar, furious and afraid, attacked again, its claws slicing through his body with terrifying force. Talon's cries filled the air as he tried to fight back, but the lion's grip was relentless. Within moments, Talon was on the ground, unable to protect himself from the creature's savage assault. The lion tore into his throat, silencing him forever. Wyatt reached the camp, finally managing to speak to the 911 operator before he passed out from shock and blood loss. The paramedics arrived moments later, but it was too late for Talon. They found him just a few feet from the camp, his body mangled beyond recognition. The cougar had been standing over him, feasting on its prey when the officers arrived. They fired their shots, driving the lion back into the trees, but it was clear that Talon was already gone. The cougar was eventually tracked down and euthanized. Its stomach revealed the horrifying signs of its predation, with blood still fresh on its muzzle. Wyatt, though gravely injured, was rushed to the hospital. The surgeons worked to save what they could of his face, though his injuries were severe. Wyatt was expected to recover, though his appearance would forever be altered by the brutal attack. In May 2011, the rugged wilderness of Alaska's Seaward Peninsula, with its snow-capped peaks, dense forests, and vast untouched landscapes, became the backdrop for a haunting ordeal. The remote region, known for its fierce weather and dangerous wildlife, is home to powerful predators like the grizzly bear, a force of nature in its own right. 54-year-old Wes Perkins, a seasoned outdoorsman and a former fire chief from Nome, Alaska, had spent decades navigating these wild terrains. But on this particular hunt, the wilderness would challenge him in ways he had never imagined, thrusting him into a life-or-death struggle with one of nature's most formidable creatures. Wes was joined by his close friends Dan and Edward Stang for a spring bear hunting trip. The group had tracked a large male grizzly bear across the snow-covered landscape, eager for a successful hunt. They had traveled to the secluded wilderness with snowmobiles, which were essential to covering the vast distances between tracks. The bear they were tracking was massive and had just emerged from hibernation. The men had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but they could have never imagined how their hunt would take a deadly turn. After several hours of following the bear's tracks through the snow, the men reached a point where the trail seemed to vanish. The bear had disappeared and the snow was undisturbed in the area. The trio began to fan out, searching for any clue that would lead them to the elusive predator. Wes, eager to find the bear, ventured further away from the group. He moved ahead, unknowingly stepping closer to the very danger he had been tracking, the weight of his steps unnoticed by the creature watching from the shadows. What Wes didn't know was that the grizzly bear had already spotted the group. The bear, a terrifying predator weighing over 1,000 pounds, was lying in wait, its sharp eyes following every move the hunters made. Grizzly bears are super predators, and this one, hungry after a long hibernation, was ready to strike. Wes had unknowingly ventured too close to its territory, and the bear was ready to defend it. Wes took a few more steps when he suddenly felt the ground tremble. The massive grizzly charged, emerging from its hidden position with terrifying speed. The bear moved faster than Wes could react, and in seconds it was on him. The first blow sent Wes sprawling to the ground, and before he could lift his rifle, the bear grabbed him by the head. The grizzly's powerful jaws closed around Wes's skull, and its claws tore into his body as it began to shake him like a rag doll. The pain was immediate and unbearable. Wes screamed, but the bear's grip was unrelenting. In a flash of horror, Wes realized he was fighting for his life. His companions, hearing the commotion, rushed to help, but what they saw as they approached was a nightmare come to life. The bear's claws and teeth were embedded in Wes's body, and the violent shaking was tearing him apart. Dan and Edward fired their rifles at the bear, trying to stop the attack, but the bear's immense strength made it nearly impossible to land a clean shot. The grizzly continued its assault, unaware of the gunfire around it. The men, desperate to save their friend, continued to fire until one shot landed and finally made the bear release Wes. The grizzly let out a roar of pain before retreating into the dense brush, leaving behind a bloodied Wes lying in the snow. The scene was chaos. Wes's face was unrecognizable, his skull shattered, his jaw broken, and blood pouring from his wounds. His eyes were swollen shut and his breath came in shallow, labored gasps. Dan and Edward, stunned and terrified, rushed to his side with no idea whether he was alive or dead. They knew they had to act quickly, but they were paralyzed by the horror of the situation. Wes, barely conscious, used all of his strength to survive. The pain was immense, but his survival instincts kicked in. He struggled to breathe, each gasp more difficult than the last. His jaw had been torn from his face, his nose was gone, and his skull had been cracked under the force of the bear's attack. But despite everything, Wes fought to stay conscious. Wes struggled to breathe, his body unable to move properly. Blood poured from his wounds and his face was unrecognizable, but he fought to stay conscious, knowing his survival depended on it. Dan and Edward worked to stabilize him as best they could, applying pressure to his wounds and trying to keep him awake. They knew they needed to get help, but they were in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness, miles away from civilization. They radioed for assistance, but the closest rescue teams were hours away. Time was running out for Wes. After what seemed like an eternity, the helicopter arrived to airlift Wes to safety. His friends helped him into the aircraft, and Wes was flown to the nearest hospital, where he was immediately placed into a medically induced coma. He underwent 26 life-saving surgeries over the next several months, the first of which was to reconstruct his shattered face. The doctors used titanium plates to rebuild his jaw, and Wes spent months recovering in the hospital, unable to speak or even eat solid food. The recovery was grueling. Wes's injuries were so severe that he had to relearn many basic functions, including how to speak, eat, and even breathe properly. The damage to his face was permanent, but he fought through the pain, determined to recover. After months of rehabilitation, Wes was finally able to leave the hospital, but his life would never be the same. Wes's survival story is nothing short of miraculous. Despite the horrific injuries he sustained, he continues to live an active life. He has shared his experience with others, warning of the unpredictable dangers that lurk in the wild. Wes's story is a witness of human resilience, showing that even in the face of unimaginable pain, the will to survive can overcome the odds. Though he can no longer hunt as he once did, Wes is not bitter. He holds no ill will toward the bear that nearly took his life. Instead, he speaks with quiet wisdom about the need for respect when interacting with wildlife. The bear did what it had to do to survive, just as Wes did.
It was August 22nd, 2014, when the morning sun rose over a private hunting concession in Zimbabwe's Matabeleland North Province. The dry season had transformed the landscape into a golden expanse of dried grasses and scattered acacia trees. The concession operated as a trophy hunting operation, catering to wealthy international clients seeking Africa's dangerous game. Marcus Webb was a 52-year-old real estate developer from Houston, Texas, whose considerable wealth had funded hunting expeditions across 4 continents over the previous decade. His trophy room featured mounts from North American elk to Siberian brown bear. Webb had never hunted African dangerous game, but the allure of adding a Cape buffalo to his collection had proven irresistible. He had paid $42,000 for the 10-day safari package. Webb's hunting experience had been limited to guided situations with significant safety margins, and he had developed confidence that exceeded his actual skill level, a dangerous combination when facing animals capable of killing experienced professional hunters. The hunting concession operated under questionable ethical standards that Webb had chosen to overlook, maintaining semi-habituated buffalo herds that reduced the challenge significantly. Professional hunter Derek Botha, 44, had worked for the concession for 6 years, guiding dozens of similar clients to successful harvests. Tracker Samuel Moyo, 38, accompanied every expedition. Webb had arrived 3 days earlier, spending the initial period sighting in his rifle and taking several plains game animals. His shooting had been acceptable, though Botha had privately noted that Webb displayed poor trigger discipline and a tendency to rush his shots when excited. Cape buffalo rank among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for an estimated 200 human fatalities annually across the continent. Adult bulls weigh between 1,100 and 2,000 pounds, with heavily bossed horns capable of going through vital organs with devastating efficiency. Unlike many prey animals that flee when wounded, buffalo frequently circle back to ambush their pursuers. Their thick hide and dense bone structure make clean kills difficult. The hunting party located a bachelor group at approximately 8:30 a.m., identifying 4 bulls resting near a waterhole. Botha identified a mature bull with exceptional horn development as the primary target. The approach required crossing 300 yards of open ground with minimal cover. Botha positioned Webb behind a termite mound at approximately 120 yards from the resting bulls. The shot broke cleanly, but Webb's excitement caused him to pull slightly right. The 375 H&H bullet struck the bull in the gut rather than the vitals, penetrating the intestinal cavity without immediately incapacitating the animal. The wounded buffalo lurched to its feet and disappeared into thick Jesse bush before anyone could fire a follow-up shot. A gut-shot buffalo represented one of the most dangerous situations in African hunting. The blood trail led into increasingly dense cover, with visibility dropping to less than 15 feet. Botha took the lead, his double rifle loaded with solid bullets designed for maximum penetration. The buffalo had traveled approximately 200 yards before stopping, standing motionless in the shadows, waiting for pursuers it knew would follow. Botha detected the buffalo's position first at barely 20 yards. He began raising his rifle when the buffalo charged. The explosive acceleration covered the distance in less than 2 seconds. Botha managed to fire one barrel, the solid grazing the buffalo's boss at an angle and tearing a chunk from the heavy horn plate without penetrating the skull. The impact barely slowed the charge. The bull's right horn caught Botha in the left hip, lifting him off his feet and throwing him into the undergrowth. The horn tip had punctured deep into his upper thigh, severing major blood vessels. Botha lay motionless where he fell, blood pooling rapidly beneath him. The buffalo wheeled around, searching for additional threats. Webb had stumbled backward during the initial charge, his rifle unfired. He turned to run, but managed only a few steps before the buffalo spotted him. The second charge was shorter but equally devastating. The horn caught Webb in the lower back, the impact driving him face first into the dirt. The buffalo gored him twice more in quick succession, the horn penetrating his abdominal cavity and causing catastrophic internal damage. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack stopped. The buffalo stepped back, snorted once, and staggered into the bush. Its own injuries were beginning to take their toll. Moyo had retreated and remained hidden until the buffalo moved away. His radio call brought an emergency response within 40 minutes. Botha had lost consciousness within minutes of being gored, the severed blood vessels draining his circulatory system. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Webb had died from massive internal trauma, his wounds too severe to survive even with immediate medical attention. The wounded buffalo was tracked and dispatched later that afternoon, found collapsed half a mile from the attack site. Authorities investigated, ruling both deaths as hunting accidents without criminal liability. The concession suspended operations for 3 weeks before resuming with enhanced safety protocols. It was June 7, 2015, and the Luangwa River flowed sluggishly through the South Luangwa Valley. The dry season had reduced the river to a fraction of its wet season width, concentrating wildlife along remaining water sources. Joseph Phiri was a 41-year-old subsistence hunter from the village of Mfue, located on the outskirts of South Luangwa National Park. Unlike organized syndicates targeting high-value species, Phiri operated independently, selling bushmeat to local markets. His hunting activities fell into a legal gray area, as traditional hunting rights conflicted with national wildlife regulations. Phiri had hunted the Luangwa Valley since childhood, learning wildlife patterns and techniques for evading park rangers. His preferred targets included impala, puku, and warthog. However, the increasing scarcity of easy game near the village had pushed Phiri to venture closer to the river, where larger predators also concentrated. The morning's expedition included Phiri's nephew, 23-year-old Thomas Banda, who was learning the hunting trade. Banda had accompanied Phiri on several previous trips, proving himself competent with the antiquated single-shot rifle they shared. Their target was a small group of puku observed grazing along the riverbank approximately 2 miles upstream. The route required crossing a shallow inlet where the river had receded, leaving a muddy channel approximately 30 feet wide and less than 3 feet deep in most places. Phiri had crossed this channel dozens of times during previous dry seasons without incident. Nile crocodiles represent Africa's largest freshwater predator, with mature males commonly exceeding 16 feet in length and weights approaching 1,650 pounds. Crocodiles possess the strongest bite force of any living animal, generating pressures exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch, sufficient to crush bone and dismember prey. Their attack pattern involves explosive acceleration from concealment, followed by the death roll, a spinning maneuver designed to disorient prey and tear away flesh. Crocodiles can remain submerged and motionless for over an hour, their massive bodies hidden below murky surfaces. The crocodile had been resting in deeper water since before dawn. The 17-foot male had dominated this stretch of river for over 2 decades, having learned to associate human activity with potential prey after successfully taking several goats and dogs over the years. Phiri entered the water first, his rifle held above his head to keep the action dry. The muddy water obscured everything below the surface, revealing nothing of what waited beneath. He was approximately halfway across, the water reaching his waist, when the attack occurred. The crocodile's strike came from directly ahead, massive jaws emerging with explosive force. The initial bite clamped around Fury's right thigh and hip, interlocking teeth penetrating deep into muscle tissue and grinding against the bone. His rifle flew from his grasp, disappearing into the murky water. The crocodile immediately initiated the death roll, spinning its massive body while maintaining its grip on Fury's leg. Fury's thigh bone snapped within the first rotation, the sickening crack lost beneath the churning water. The hip joint dislocated completely during the second rotation as the muscle and ligament tore away from the pelvis. Banda watched from the riverbank, unable to intervene without a weapon and unwilling to enter the water. His uncle's screams were cut short as the crocodile pulled him beneath the surface, the death roll continuing underwater. Air bubbles marked the location of the struggle for approximately 45 seconds before the water became still. The crocodile surfaced briefly, then submerged again, dragging its prey toward a submerged log. Fury had lost consciousness within seconds of being pulled under, the combination of traumatic shock, blood loss, and drowning ensuring rapid death. Banda ran to the village, bringing dozens of residents to the riverbank within minutes. Wildlife Authority officers arrived the following day, confirming the attack through witness testimony and recovery of Fury's rifle. The crocodile was never captured, as regulations protected the species within the ecosystem management area. It was September 18, 2017, when the first autumn frost settled over the remote valleys of British Columbia's coast mountains. The salmon runs were winding down, leaving grizzly bears scrambling to accumulate fat reserves for hibernation. This period of hyperphagia made the animals both predictable and dangerous. Ivan Kozlov was a 47-year-old commercial fisherman based out of Prince Rupert, whose seasonal income had declined steadily as salmon stocks collapsed. The Russian immigrant had arrived in Canada 15 years earlier, building a modest life around commercial fishing that was now failing. Kozlov had discovered an alternative revenue stream through illegal wildlife trade, specifically the harvest of bear gallbladders for export to Asian traditional medicine markets. Bear gallbladders commanded extraordinary prices, fetching between $3,000 and $5,000 through the right connections. Over 3 years, Kozlov had killed approximately 15 black bears for their gallbladders, operating in remote areas where conservation officer presence was minimal. The transition to grizzly bears represented an escalation in both risk and potential reward. Kozlov's partner was 39-year-old Yuri Petrov, a fellow Russian immigrant who worked sporadically in the logging industry. Petrov had accompanied Kozlov on several previous hunts, demonstrating adequate skill with firearms and a willingness to participate in illegal activities. The target area was a remote salmon stream approximately 40 miles from the nearest maintained road, accessible only through dense coastal rainforest. The men had established a primitive camp 2 days earlier, observing bear activity and identifying several large grizzlies. Grizzly bears represent North America's most powerful terrestrial predator, with adult males commonly exceeding 800 pounds and reaching heights of 7 feet when standing upright. Their muscular structure and dense bone mass make them extraordinarily difficult to kill quickly. Grizzlies can sprint at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour, covering short distances faster than any human can react. Their claws, measuring up to 4 inches, can cause devastating wounds with a single swipe, while their bite force exceeds 1,200 pounds per square inch. The morning began with heavy fog, reducing visibility to less than 50 feet along the stream corridor. Kozlov and Petrov took positions on opposite banks, approximately 100 yards apart. The first bear appeared at approximately 7:45 a.m., a large male moving along the stream bank directly toward Kozlov's position. The shot struck the bear in the shoulder area, but the angle caused the bullet to deflect off the dense shoulder blade, rather than penetrating the chest cavity. The impact staggered the bear momentarily before pain and defensive rage overwhelmed any instinct to flee. 800 pounds of enraged grizzly charged directly toward the source of its pain. Kozlov attempted to chamber a second round, but the bolt handle slipped in his sweaty grip, costing precious seconds. The bear covered 40 yards in less than 3 seconds, its massive frame crashing through underbrush with terrifying speed. Kozlov managed to fire a second shot from the hip, but the round went wide. The initial impact knocked Kozlov off his feet, his rifle flying from his hands as the bear's momentum carried both of them to the ground. The grizzly bit down on Kozlov's shoulder and upper arm, the crushing force shattering his collarbone instantly. Kozlov screamed as the bear shook its head once, violently, then released. The bear stepped back momentarily, assessing whether the threat had been neutralized. Kozlov lay motionless, either from shock or instinct, but when Petrov's first shot cracked across the stream and struck the bear in the hindquarters, the animal spun toward this new threat, then back toward Kozlov. The sudden movement triggered the bear's defensive instincts again. The grizzly lunged forward and delivered a single devastating bite to Kozlov's head, its massive jaws closing around his skull with tremendous force. The damage was catastrophic and instant. Petrov's second shot hit the bear in the ribcage, and his third struck the spine. The grizzly collapsed immediately, its hindquarters paralyzed. The animal continued snapping and swiping for several seconds before blood loss caused it to go still. Kozlov had died from head trauma. The initial shoulder injuries, while severe, might have been survivable with immediate medical attention, but the final bite had caused damage incompatible with life. Petrov's satellite phone call to emergency services revealed their illegal activities. Police and conservation officers reached the scene via helicopter approximately 4 hours later. Petrov was arrested on multiple wildlife violations, eventually pleading guilty to charges resulting in substantial fines. The investigation revealed the extent of Kozlov's poaching operation through evidence recovered from his residence. It was October 3, 2018, and the endless plains of the Serengeti ecosystem stretched toward the horizon under a cloudless African sky. The short rains had begun to green the landscape, drawing massive herds of wildebeest and zebra back toward traditional grazing grounds. Among these herds moved smaller family groups of elephants, the matriarchs leading their families along ancient migration routes. Emmanuel Masanja was a 36-year-old former safari camp employee whose knowledge of the Serengeti had made him valuable to ivory poaching syndicates. His dismissal from legitimate employment 3 years earlier, following accusations of theft, had pushed him toward the lucrative world of elephant poaching. The decision had proven financially rewarding. The syndicate operated across the Tanzania-Kenya border region, targeting elephant herds in areas where enforcement varied. Chinese buyers paid premium prices for high-quality tusks, with a single large elephant potentially yielding ivory worth over $50,000. This operation targeted a family group of 11 elephants observed moving through a remote section of the ecosystem, far from ranger patrol routes. The group included several adult females with impressive tusks, as well as younger animals and calves that would be collateral damage in the planned assault. Joining Masanja were 3 other men. Juma Rashid, 42, served as the primary shooter, his experience with large-caliber weapons making him the most reliable marksman. Abdul Omari, 28, and Hassan Mwanga, 31, would handle butchery work. The team had traveled overnight by vehicle, covering the final miles on foot to avoid leaving tire tracks that could lead investigators to the kill site. They carried enough water and supplies for 3 days. African elephants represent the largest land animals on Earth, with adult females weighing between 6,000 and 8,000 pounds. Their intelligence rivals that of great apes, with demonstrated capacity for problem-solving, emotional memory, and complex social bonds. Elephant family groups are led by matriarchs whose experience guides the family through seasonal movements. When threatened, elephants employ sophisticated defensive strategies, with adults forming protective circles around calves. A charging elephant can reach speeds of 25 miles per hour, with enough mass to trample humans into unrecognizable remains. The poachers located the elephant family at approximately 2:30 p.m., animals resting in scattered shade near a seasonal waterhole. The matriarch, an enormous female with tusks extending nearly to the ground, had positioned herself on the group's periphery, her elevated trunk testing the wind for danger. Rashid set up his shooting position approximately 150 yards from the resting elephants using a termite mound for stability. The plan called for eliminating the matriarch first to cause chaos among the family and prevent organized defensive responses. The first shot struck the matriarch behind the ear, the 458 caliber bullet penetrating her skull, but failing to destroy the brain immediately. The massive animal staggered violently, blood streaming from the wound as she fought to stay upright. Her trumpet of pain galvanized the family into action. Rather than fleeing as expected, the elephants formed a defensive cluster around the calves, their bodies oriented toward the threat. Rashid's second shot struck a younger female in the shoulder, shattering bone but failing to penetrate vital organs. The wounded elephant screamed, and the matriarch's protective instincts overrode her own rapidly failing body. Despite the catastrophic head wound, the old female turned toward the poacher's position and charged. The ground shook as nearly 8,000 pounds of wounded elephant thundered across the savannah. Her gait was unsteady, her movements growing more erratic as blood loss and brain trauma took their toll. But momentum and rage carried her forward. Rashid fired twice more, both shots striking the matriarch's chest. She stumbled but kept coming. Masanja, Omari, and Mwanga scattered in different directions, abandoning equipment in desperate attempts to escape. The matriarch reached Rashid just as her front legs began to buckle. Her trunk lashed out, striking him across the chest and sending him sprawling. As she collapsed forward, Her massive weight came down on Rashid's lower body, pinning him beneath nearly 4 tons of dying elephant. His pelvis and legs were crushed instantly, and the impact ruptured internal organs. Rashid's screams echoed across the savannah as he lay trapped beneath the matriarch's body, unable to free himself. Masanja had fled approximately 60 yards when he stumbled. Looking back, he saw the matriarch motionless on the ground, Rashid's upper body visible beneath her massive form. The other elephants trumpeted in alarm, several moving protectively around the fallen matriarch. Rashid died over the following minutes, the crushing weight on his lower body causing catastrophic internal bleeding that no amount of struggle could overcome. The matriarch had succumbed to her wounds moments after the impact, her final act ensuring that at least one of her attackers would not escape. Masanja, Omari, and Mwanga regrouped at a distance, watching as the elephant family lingered near the matriarch's body. They were too shaken to attempt recovering their equipment or Rashid's body. Without adequate water and fearing the remaining elephants, the 3 survivors fled on foot across the savannah. Omari had been clipped by the matriarch's trunk during her charge, cracking several ribs and causing internal bruising. By the second day, every breath had become agony. His pace slowed considerably as sharp pain radiated through his chest with each step. Masanja and Mwanga took turns supporting him as they staggered across the plains. The 3 men reached a remote village on the 3rd day, collapsing at the edge of the settlement. Omari was barely conscious, his breathing shallow, his skin pale from dehydration. Village elders summoned medical assistance, but the men's confessions quickly drew the attention of local authorities. Omari was transported to a hospital where doctors discovered fractured ribs and internal bleeding. He survived following emergency surgery, but faced months of recovery. Masanja and Mwanga were treated for severe dehydration before being taken into custody. Their confessions led authorities to the scene, where Rashid's body was recovered from beneath the matriarch's carcass. The younger female had also succumbed to her shoulder wound overnight. The remaining family group had moved on, their fate unknown. Tanzanian authorities charged all 3 survivors with wildlife trafficking. Omari's trial was delayed by his medical condition, but all 3 eventually received substantial prison sentences. The matriarch's final charge had cost one poacher his life and left another with injuries that would never fully heal.
The Alaskan wilderness in late October is a place of stark contrasts. Pristine snow blankets the landscape in deceptive tranquility, while beneath this serene surface, life and death play out in brutal, unforgiving terms. For apex predators like the grizzly bear, these early winter months trigger a desperate race against time, a final push to accumulate enough fat reserves before hibernation. But what none of them could have foreseen was how this hunt would end. Not with a clean kill, but a blood-soaked warning from nature itself. For 3 experienced hunters from Anchorage, this harsh reality was precisely what drew them to the remote Talkeetna Mountains, 180 miles north of civilization. James Whitaker, 42, his brother Michael, 38, and their longtime hunting partner Robert Callahan, 45, had been tracking game in Alaska's backcountry for over 2 decades. They were well-equipped, well-trained, and well aware of the dangers that lurked in these mountains. Their target was a massive male grizzly that local guides had nicknamed the Ghost, a 900-pound behemoth that had developed a reputation for raiding cabins and killing livestock on the outskirts of smaller settlements. The bear's territory spanned over 400 square miles, making him notoriously difficult to locate. The hunting party had secured one of the few permits issued annually for grizzly hunting, justified by the bear's increasingly bold encounters with humans. Still, no one truly knew what the Ghost was capable of, not until it was far too late. On the morning of October 23, 2019, the 3rd day of their expedition, fresh snowfall provided the break they had been waiting for. Clear tracks, massive even by grizzly standards, led them deep into a ravine flanked by dense pine forest. The men moved with practiced precision, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air as they followed the unmistakable trail. At 11:42 a.m., Robert spotted movement approximately 200 yards ahead, a dark shape against the snow partially obscured by underbrush. Through his scope, James confirmed it was their target. The massive grizzly was digging at the base of a fallen tree, likely searching for hibernating rodents or cached food. The hunters positioned themselves strategically, forming a loose triangle with clear lines of sight. James, the most experienced marksman, took the lead position. At 175 yards, he steadied his .338 Winchester Magnum rifle against a tree trunk, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the valley. The bear roared, a primal sound that seemed to shake the air, and reared up on its hind legs, towering nearly 10 feet tall. James fired again, striking the bear in the shoulder. Michael and Robert joined in, their rifles cracking in quick succession. The grizzly absorbed 5 more rounds, staggering but somehow remaining upright, before a final shot from James sent the massive creature crashing to the ground. The hunters waited the standard 30 minutes before approaching a downed predator, a safety protocol that had served them well over the years of hunting dangerous game. The half hour passed with tense vigilance, their rifles trained on the motionless form partially hidden in the underbrush. No movement, no sound except the whisper of wind through the pine branches and the occasional distant calls of ravens. At 12:25 p.m., the men began their cautious approach. The snow around the fallen bear was stained crimson, spreading outward in a stark contrast against the pristine white. As they closed to within 50 yards, they made a critical decision that would prove fatal. To cover more ground and approach from multiple angles, standard procedure when confirming a kill of this magnitude, they separated. James moved directly toward the bear's position while Michael circled to the right and Robert to the left, maintaining a distance of about 30 yards between them. The ravine's topography meant they quickly lost sight of each other as they navigated the uneven terrain. James reached the bear first. The massive grizzly lay on its side, partially concealed by a tangle of fallen branches and underbrush. From his position, James could see the animal's head and upper body, motionless in the blood-stained snow. He approached to within 15 feet, his rifle raised, senses heightened by the proximity to such a formidable predator, even one that appeared dead. What happened next occurred with such explosive violence that Michael and Robert, just 30 yards away, had no time to react. The dead bear, its body temperature dropping, blood pooling beneath it, 8 rifle rounds in its massive frame, surged upward in one final adrenaline-fueled attack. 900 pounds of muscle, fur, and fury erupted from the underbrush. The grizzly covered the 15 feet separating it from James in less than a second. Before the hunter could raise his rifle, before he could even cry out in warning to his companions, the bear was upon him. The bear wasn't done yet, and James was standing exactly where it needed him to be. The sound that reached Michael and Robert wasn't a scream, there hadn't been time for that. It was the sickening combination of a roar, a crunch, and the wet tearing of fabric and flesh. They sprinted toward the commotion, rifles raised, shouting James's name. By the time they reached the clearing, the violence had already ended. The bear lay collapsed across James's lower body, both predator and prey motionless in the crimson-stained snow. The hunter's rifle lay 5 feet away, unfired. His face and throat were unrecognizable, the bear's massive jaws having crushed his skull in one catastrophic bite. Death had been instantaneous, a small mercy in an otherwise merciless end. The grizzly, too, was finally irrefutably dead. Its last act of vengeance had depleted whatever reserves of strength and will had kept it alive after absorbing 8 rifle rounds, any one of which would eventually have proven fatal. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game investigation that followed revealed the extraordinary circumstances of the attack. The bear had sustained catastrophic internal injuries from the multiple rifle rounds. Its lungs were shredded, its liver ruptured, and 2 bullets had penetrated its heart. By all physiological measures, the animal should have died instantly from such trauma. Yet somehow, through some combination of adrenaline, primal instinct, and the remarkable physical resilience that makes grizzlies among the most formidable predators on Earth, the bear had remained conscious and capable of one final devastating attack. The autopsy revealed another detail that added a grim footnote to the tragedy. The grizzly had been suffering from an impacted tooth that had developed a severe infection, likely causing significant pain and potentially explaining its increasingly aggressive behavior towards humans in recent months. The bear had been dying slowly even before the hunter's bullets found their mark. Today, in the Alaskan Hunting Safety Training Program, the case of James Whitaker serves as a sobering reminder of the unforgiving nature of wilderness predators. Instructors emphasize the 30-30-30 rule. Wait 30 minutes after a predator appears down, approach no closer than 30 feet initially, and never separate from hunting partners by more than 30 yards when confirming a kill. In the remote corner of the Talkeetna Mountains where James fell, a simple stone marker now stands. Hunters who pass by often leave a rifle cartridge or touch the stone for luck. It marks the spot where hunter and hunted both experienced their terrifying final affliction, a place where nature demonstrated that even in its dying moments, the wild remains untamed, unpredictable, and ultimately sovereign. The Namibian savanna in August is a study in harsh contrasts. Scorching days give way to frigid nights. Lush oases punctuate vast stretches of arid wasteland. Life and death play out in brutal, unforgiving terms beneath an indifferent sky. For the animals that call this unforgiving landscape home, survival means adapting to these extremes. For humans who venture here seeking trophies, it means respecting them. But some hunters don't learn that lesson until it's far too late. Victor Reinhardt had never been one for respect. At 52, the German-born real estate magnate had built a reputation in big-game hunting circles as a man who pushed boundaries. His sprawling estate in Bavaria featured a trophy room with over 70 mounted heads, including all of Africa's Big Five. His social media accounts boasted hundreds of thousands of followers who devoured his graphic hunting photos and boastful captions. What his online admirers didn't see were the corners cut, the rules bent, the ethics compromised in pursuit of his trophies. And in Namibia, those compromises would come back for him with claws and teeth. On August 17, 2022, Reinhardt arrived at a private hunting concession in Namibia's remote Kunini region. He had paid $85,000 for the opportunity to hunt a male lion, a guaranteed kill, as the less reputable outfitters sometimes quietly promise their wealthy clients. His guide, Tobias Nkosi, was a 38-year-old veteran tracker with 20 years of experience leading hunts across southern Africa. Nkosi had reservations about Reinhardt from the moment they met. The German's custom rifle, a .375 H&H Magnum with gold inlays and ivory grip, was immaculate. But his eyes held something Nkosi had seen before in certain clients. Not the respectful caution of a hunter, but the gleeful anticipation of a killer. For 3 days, they tracked a magnificent black-maned lion across the savannah. The animal was estimated to be around 9 years old, past his breeding prime, and therefore approved for hunting under Namibian conservation laws. On the morning of the 4th day, they spotted him resting beneath an acacia tree approximately 200 yards away. What happened next would later be pieced together from Nkosi's testimony, Reinhardt's recovered equipment, and forensic evidence. The German insisted on taking the shot despite the lion's position, partially obscured by brush and at a problematic angle. Nkosi advised waiting for a cleaner opportunity, but Reinhardt was impatient. He fired. It wasn't the clean kill he wanted, but it would be the last shot he ever took. The shot struck the lion but missed vital organs. The wounded animal roared and bolted into the brush, leaving a blood trail across the savannah. Proper protocol dictated waiting at least an hour before tracking a wounded lion, allowing time for the animal to weaken or die rather than following it while it's still strong enough to attack. Reinhardt insisted they pursue immediately. He wanted footage of the dying lion for his social media channels. The blood trail led them 5 miles across increasingly rocky terrain away from the open savannah and into a labyrinth of stone outcroppings and narrow ravines. By mid-afternoon, they reached a series of low cliffs where the blood disappeared into the mouth of a cave, a dark opening approximately 4 feet high and 6 feet wide. Nkosi immediately recognized the danger. Cave systems in this region were known to harbor multiple predator species, particularly during the heat of the day. The wounded lion had likely sought shelter in the darkness, making it exponentially more dangerous. He firmly advised retreating, regrouping, and returning with additional trackers and proper lighting equipment. Reinhardt refused. The light was perfect now, he argued. The dramatic setting of a cave would make for an exceptional trophy photo, something his followers hadn't seen before. He activated the camera mounted to his hunting helmet, checked his rifle, and switched on a small tactical flashlight. Despite Nikosi's increasingly urgent warnings, Reinhardt ducked into the cave entrance alone. The temperature dropped immediately as he moved from the 95-degree heat of the savannah into the cold darkness of the cave. The coppery smell of blood mingled with another odor, the unmistakable musk of predators and the sickly sweet scent of decay. His flashlight beam caught glimpses of bones scattered across the cave floor, antelope and zebra mostly, but also the unmistakable elongated skull of a cheetah. There were predators in that cave, more than one, and none of them afraid of men. This wasn't just a random cave, it was a den. And just outside the den, behind several thick bushes, was a pack of hyenas, keeping a watchful eye on the hunter. Approximately 30 feet into the darkness, the cave widened into a chamber roughly 20 feet across. Reinhardt's flashlight beam caught a reflection of amber eyes, the wounded lion backed against the far wall, its massive chest heaving with labored breaths. Blood matted its magnificent black mane. The beast's lips pulled back in a silent snarl, muscles tensed for a final stand. Reinhardt raised his rifle, centering the scope on the lion's chest. His fingers tightened on the trigger. In his excitement, in his focus on the wounded lion, he failed to sweep his light across the rest of the chamber. He failed to notice the low hyena growls emanating from the shadows to his left. He failed to see the other pairs of eyes watching him from recessed areas of the cave. The first hyena struck from his blind spot, 80 pounds of muscle and bone slamming into his side, powerful jaws clamping around his forearm with bone-crushing force. The impact sent his rifle clattering across the stone floor. His scream echoed through the chamber as a second hyena lunged for his legs, teeth shredding through his canvas pants and into the flesh beneath. The commotion triggered the wounded lion's final surge of adrenaline. With a roar that seemed to shake the very walls of the cave, the massive cat launched itself across the chamber. Its enormous paws, each armed with claws like curved daggers, struck Reinhardt's chest with such force that 3 ribs shattered on impact. The lion's jaws closed around the hunter's shoulder and neck, powerful enough to sever his spine with a single bite. Outside the cave, Nikosi heard the horrific sounds of the attack. The initial scream cut short, followed by snarls, growls, and the wet, tearing sounds of feeding predators. An experienced guide, he knew better than to enter the cave alone. He retreated to their vehicle and radioed for emergency assistance. By the time a response team arrived 3 hours later, the sounds from the cave had subsided. Using powerful spotlights and armed with rifles, they entered the chamber. What they found defied easy description. Reinhardt's remains were scattered across the cave floor, limbs separated from his torso, flesh stripped from bone, his expensive hunting gear torn to shreds. Of the lion, they found only blood smears and tufts of black mane. The hyenas too had retreated deeper into the cave system, likely through passages too narrow for humans to follow. But what they left behind was far more terrifying than what they took. The recovery team collected what remained of Reinhardt and his equipment. Among the recovered items was his helmet camera, its casing cracked but its memory card intact. Most of the footage was corrupted, but forensic technicians managed to recover the final frame, a still image captured at the moment before the attack. The image shows the wounded lion in the background, but dominating the foreground, previously hidden in Reinhardt's blind spot, are the reflections of multiple pairs of eyes. Some belonging to hyenas, others unidentifiable, all staring directly into the camera lens. The image now serves as a training tool for professional guides across Africa, a chilling reminder of what awaits those who enter predator territory without proper respect or caution. Victor Reinhardt's death prompted changes to hunting regulations in Namibia, including mandatory waiting periods after wounding dangerous game and prohibitions against entering caves or enclosed spaces when tracking predators. His social media accounts, once filled with triumphant poses over dead animals, now serve as digital memorials. The comment sections transformed into debates about the ethics of trophy hunting. In the remote Kunini region, local guides tell visitors that on certain nights you can hear strange sounds echoing from the cave system. Not quite human, not quite animal. They say it's the spirit of the arrogant hunter, forever trapped in darkness, eternally experiencing his terrifying final affliction at the claws and teeth of creatures he once thought he could conquer. The cave floor told a story soaked in blood, a lion and a pack of hyenas claiming revenge in the most horrifying way imaginable. The Amazon rainforest holds secrets that have remained undisturbed for millennia. Beneath its dense canopy, where sunlight filters through in fragmented beams, life and death play out in ancient, unforgiving rhythms. It's a place where humans are not the apex predator, a reality that Savannah Locke would discover in the most horrific way possible. She thought she was hunting a legend. What she didn't know was that it had already chosen her. At 34, Savannah had built a reputation among the controversial trophy hunters. The walls of her Montana ranch displayed the mounted heads of animals from 6 continents: African elephants, Siberian tigers, polar bears, each representing a victory in her quest to conquer the natural world. But one trophy had eluded her: the rare melanistic jaguar, sometimes called the Black Panther of the Americas. With fewer than 600 estimated to exist, these shadow-colored predators represented the ultimate prize for a hunter seeking notoriety. When rumors reached her of a large male spotted near the Brazil-Peru border, Savannah immediately chartered a private plane to Manaus. On May 12, 2023, she hired Paulo Mendez, a 52-year-old local guide with decades of experience navigating the Amazon's treacherous terrain. Though he had worked with hunters before, Paulo primarily led scientific expeditions and photography tours. He agreed to take Savannah into the jungle, but made it clear he would only track the animal, not participate in the kill. But Paulo wasn't the only one watching Savannah's every move. They ventured deep into the rainforest, traveling first by boat along the winding tributaries of the Amazon River, then on foot through increasingly dense vegetation. Savannah carried her custom bespoke rifle, equipped with a night vision scope and hand-loaded cartridges designed for maximum stopping power. Around her neck hung a high-definition GoPro camera to document her triumph. For 3 days, they followed promising signs: distinctive paw prints in the mud, claw marks on trees, and the remains of a capybara that had been dragged up into the branches, a hunting behavior unique to jaguars. Each sign pushed them further from established trails and deeper into pristine jungle that rarely saw human footprints. By the 4th day, Paulo's demeanor had changed. The signs they were following suggested an animal of unusual size and hunting proficiency. More concerning were the patterns he observed: circular tracks around their previous night's campsite and evidence that the jaguar had backtracked along their own trail. In his experience, this wasn't the behavior of prey being hunted, but of a predator stalking hunters. Little did she know, something wasn't fleeing, it was closing in. That evening, as they set up camp in a small clearing, Paulo urged Savannah to abandon the hunt. The jaguar, he explained, was displaying territorial behavior typically seen only when cubs were nearby or when an animal had previous negative encounters with humans. Either scenario made for an unpredictable and potentially aggressive predator. Savannah dismissed his concerns. She hadn't traveled 4,000 miles and paid $50,000 to return empty-handed. The more dangerous the hunt, the more valuable the trophy, and the more engagement her post would receive. She informed Paulo that she would continue alone if necessary. By morning, her decision was made for her. Paulo had disappeared during the night, taking the satellite phone and emergency medical supplies with him. He had left only a hand-drawn map marking the route back to the river, weighed down with a stone beside her tent. Most people would have recognized this as the final warning it was. Savannah saw it as an opportunity. Now she could claim the trophy entirely as her own achievement without sharing credit with a guide. She packed her essential gear, activated her personal GPS tracker, and continued deeper into the jungle. What Savannah failed to realize was that she had crossed a threshold. In this primal environment, her high-tech weapons and hunting experience meant little against an animal perfectly evolved for this ecosystem over millions of years. The jaguar, the third largest big cat in the world and pound for pound the strongest, can crush a caiman skull with a single bite. Its spotted coat, or in this case black fur with nearly invisible rosettes, renders it practically invisible in dappled jungle light. As Savannah pushed forward, the forest grew denser and darker. The cacophony of birds and monkeys that had accompanied their journey gradually diminished until an unnatural silence enveloped her. Experienced jungle travelers recognize this silence as a warning. The smaller creatures go quiet when a predator is near. She should have turned back then, but silence is only merciful to those who listen. By midday, the humidity had reached oppressive levels. Sweat soaked through Savannah's moisture-wicking shirt as she macheted through the undergrowth. She paused to check her GPS and take a drink from her water bottle. That's when she noticed it, a strange pattern in the foliage about 50 yards ahead. Something dark and sleek moved behind a curtain of leaves, visible for just a fraction of a second before disappearing. Savannah raised her rifle, peering through the scope at the spot where she'd seen movement. Nothing. She lowered the weapon and continued forward, her senses heightened, adrenaline sharpening her focus. She was getting close. She could feel it. What she didn't realize was that she had been close for hours, not to her quarry, but to her executioner. The jaguar had been shadowing her movement since dawn, sometimes from the ground, sometimes from the branches above. Unlike other big cats that chase down prey, jaguars are ambush predators of extraordinary patience. This one had been evaluating her, learning her patterns, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That evening, Savannah made camp in a small clearing beside a stream. As she secured her tent, heavy raindrops began to fall, quickly intensifying into a tropical downpour. Lightning flashed across the sky, momentarily illuminating the wall of vegetation surrounding her. In those strobing moments of clarity, she could have sworn she saw eyes reflecting back at her from the darkness. Two golden orbs floating in the black void of the jungle. The storm worsened overnight. By morning, the stream had swollen into a rushing torrent, cutting off her planned route. Checking her GPS, Savannah realized she would need to detour several miles to find another crossing point. As she packed up her sodden gear, she noticed something that sent ice through her veins despite the tropical heat. Massive paw prints circling her tent, pressed into the mud sometime during the night. The jaguar had been within feet of her as she slept. For the first time, fear began to erode Savannah's confidence. She decided to abandon the hunt and return to civilization. But the jungle had other plans. The GPS signal weakened under the thick canopy, especially with storm clouds still blocking the sky. The landmarks on Paolo's map were difficult to identify in the altered landscape where the rain had transformed familiar terrain. As afternoon faded toward evening, Savannah realized she was lost. The rain had finally stopped, but darkness would arrive within the hour. She needed to make camp again, a prospect that filled her with dread after discovering the previous night's visitor. She found a small rise of ground near a massive kapok tree, hoping the elevation would provide some security. As she unrolled her sleeping bag, a subtle sound caught her attention. Not a snap or crash, but the gentle patter of water droplets falling in an irregular pattern. Something was moving through the wet foliage above her. Savannah reached for her rifle, but before her fingers could close around the stock, the world exploded into chaos. A massive shadow dropped from the branches 20 feet above, a silent missile of muscle and fury. The jaguar struck her from behind with surgical precision, its powerful jaws clamping around the base of her skull, the killing technique perfected over millennia of evolution. The force of the impact drove Savannah face first into the mud. Her rifle clattered away, useless now. The jaguar's teeth found the vulnerable spot where her spine met her skull, applying pressure with bone-crushing force. In the wild, this technique severs the spinal cord of prey instantly. For Savannah, it meant paralysis but not immediate death. A horrific awareness trapped in a body that could no longer move or fight back. The predator dragged her limp form deeper into the undergrowth, powerful muscles making light work of her 140-pound frame. Following instinctual behavior, the jaguar began covering its kill with leaves and debris, a caching technique that preserves meat and hides it from scavengers. As darkness fell completely, the last thing Savannah saw was the jaguar's golden eyes studying her with cold, alien intelligence before the leaves covered her face. The emergency signal from Savannah's GPS tracker continued transmitting for 3 days before a Brazilian search and rescue team pinpointed the location. What they found was a grim tableau that told the story of her final moments. Her campsite was destroyed, equipment scattered across a wide area. 20 feet up the kapok tree, deep claw marks scored the bark, the jaguar's wading perch. Near the base of the tree, they discovered her rifle, the scope shattered. 50 yards into the undergrowth, partially buried under leaves and branches, they found what remained of Savannah Locke. The GoPro camera was recovered nearby, its casing cracked, but its memory card intact. The footage, later analyzed by Brazilian authorities, captured 42 seconds of her final moments. The video begins with Savannah looking up, alerted by something above. The camera shakes violently as the impact occurs, and for a brief moment the lens captures a glimpse of midnight black fur and a golden eye before the screen goes dark. The Brazilian Environmental Protection Agency closed the area to all hunting expeditions following the incident. Paulo Mendes, who had hiked out to report the dangerous conditions, later told investigators he had recognized signs of a jaguar that local indigenous people called O Fantasma Negro, the Black Ghost, a legendary male known for its unusual size and aggression towards humans who ventured too deep into its territory. Savannah Locke's death sparked intense debate in hunting circles and conservation communities alike. For some, it represented nature's justice against those who kill for trophies. For others, it was simply the inevitable outcome when humans forget their place in the natural order. In the dense Amazon rainforest, where sunlight struggles to reach the forest floor, the black jaguar continues its silent patrol. Its territory remains inviolate, its dominance unchallenged. For in this ancient realm, humans are not the apex predator, merely visitors who sometimes forget they are not immortal until the jungle delivers its terrifying end.
It was May 2018 in the Atchafalaya Basin floodway. A vast network of cypress-studded channels and flooded hardwood forests spanning nearly 1 million acres across south-central Louisiana. Recent heavy rains had pushed water levels higher than normal, transforming familiar hunting grounds into a maze of submerged vegetation and murky channels, where visibility beneath the surface rarely exceeded a few inches. The flooding had displaced countless animals, forcing them into compressed territories along narrow banks and shallow backwaters. Beneath the canopy of Spanish moss and tupelo trees, the slow-moving water concealed an ecosystem built on ambush and patience. The air hung thick with humidity, carrying the scent of decay and wet earth that permeated the entire basin. Benton Cole was 39 years old and had spent multiple seasons navigating these flooded bayous as a licensed nuisance alligator control contractor. His work required him to respond to landowner complaints about aggressive animals, particularly during nesting season, when territorial behavior intensified. Benton was efficient and methodical, preferring to work quickly and move on to the next site. He understood the risks inherent in close-range work with large reptiles, but years of experience had built a confidence grounded in routine. That morning, he and his partner had launched their aluminum skiff into a remote channel after receiving repeated complaints about a particularly large male alligator occupying a narrow stretch of water adjacent to an active nesting area where females had recently constructed egg mounds. The landowner reported that the animal had been displaying heightened aggression, lunging at anything that approached the shoreline. Previous attempts to observe the animal had proven unsuccessful due to the dense vegetation. Peak nesting season had arrived, a period when female alligators construct massive mounds of vegetation to incubate their eggs, and males patrol nearby waters with zero tolerance for intrusion. The recent floods had only amplified this behavior, reducing visibility and forcing both humans and animals into tighter proximity than usual. Benton and his partner navigated slowly through the channel, scanning the banks for signs of disturbance. The water was the color of dark tea, stained by tannins and sediment, making it impossible to see more than a few inches below the surface. They located the reported nesting site along a muddy bank thick with reeds and submerged logs. The plan was straightforward: secure lines, assess the situation, and proceed with removal protocols if necessary. The American alligator is a prehistoric survivor, largely unchanged for millions of years, perfectly adapted to ambush hunting in freshwater environments. Adults can exceed 13 feet in length and weigh over 1,000 pounds, with jaw muscles capable of delivering one of the strongest bite forces ever measured in a living animal. Unlike many predators that rely on pursuit, alligators employ explosive acceleration from concealment, using their powerful tails to propel themselves upward from beneath the surface. During nesting season, male alligators become fiercely territorial, defending established zones against any perceived threat. Their attacks are not acts of hunger but calculated responses to territorial violation. They strike without warning, relying on a combination of brute force, drowning tactics, and a behavior known as the death roll, a violent rotational spin used to subdue prey and tear flesh. The skiff idled alongside the muddy bank while Benton leaned forward over the gunwale, working to clear a line that had snagged on submerged vegetation. His partner maintained position, handling the throttle and watching the surrounding water. The turbidity was worse than anticipated. The water was completely opaque just inches below the surface. Rather than repositioning the boat or using extended tools, Benton made the decision to reach directly into the water near the nesting bank to free the tangled line. His hand penetrated the murk, fingers searching for the obstruction. What he could not see was the massive male positioned directly below, motionless and waiting. The alligator lunged upward with explosive force, jaws erupting through the surface and closing around Benton's forearm with crushing pressure. The strike was instantaneous, offering no opportunity for reaction or withdrawal. Teeth designed to grip rather than slice locked down, and the sheer momentum of the animal's upward trajectory pulled Benton off balance. His body pitched forward over the side of the skiff and into the channel. The water swallowed him immediately, the surface churning as the alligator initiated its primary killing behavior. The death roll began in a violent burst. The alligator rotated its entire body rapidly, turning Benton underwater in quick, disorienting spins. The animal completed several full rotations before pausing, its grip on his arm never weakening. During the pause, Benton remained submerged, held beneath the surface without opportunity to breathe. The sequence repeated, explosive rotations followed by prolonged submersion, then another burst of spinning. Each cycle prevented any chance to surface for air. As the animal turned during one rotation, Benton's trapped arm was wrenched against the submerged gunwale of the skiff. The combined force of his body weight, the alligator's torsion, and the rigid metal edge generating enough pressure to fracture bone. The structural damage was immediate and severe, separating tissue and dislocating joints as the rotations continued in intervals. The pattern persisted over several minutes. Between bursts of rolling, the alligator maintained its hold and kept Benton underwater, the continuous submersion preventing any intake of air. Water flooded his airway during the forced submersions, each pause driving him deeper into oxygen deprivation. His attempts to struggle diminished as consciousness began to fade, his movements becoming weaker with each cycle. The alligator showed no signs of releasing, its instincts governing the duration and intensity of the attack. The prolonged inability to breathe caused his body to eventually stop resisting altogether. Once resistance ceased, the grip loosened incrementally, the animal remaining close to the site rather than abandoning it. The cause of death was drowning, compounded by severe traumatic injuries sustained during the repeated death rolls and forced submersion. Benton's partner immediately activated emergency protocols, but the conditions made immediate intervention nearly impossible. The alligator remained in the vicinity of the nesting site, its defensive behavior unchanged. Recovery operations were delayed by visibility challenges and the confirmed presence of an actively aggressive animal. Area authorities temporarily restricted access to the section of the floodway, and wildlife officials conducted assessments of the site. The incident was classified as a territorial defense during peak nesting season, with environmental conditions contributing significantly to the outcome. Benton's family received notification within hours, and the contractor community throughout Louisiana responded with somber recognition of the inherent dangers present in floodwater work. Local news coverage emphasized the unpredictability of working in flooded environments during breeding periods, when even experienced professionals face elevated risks from animals defending reproductive territories. State wildlife agencies issued renewed warnings about approaching nesting sites during peak season, particularly in areas where flooding had compressed territorial boundaries. It was September 2016 at the Umgeni River estuary, where murky freshwater collided with the Indian Ocean along the coast of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Heavy rainfall had pounded the region for 3 days, swelling the river and pushing massive volumes of sediment-laden water into the coastal zone. The runoff carried organic matter and disoriented baitfish, creating a feeding opportunity that drew predators from deeper offshore waters into the shallow estuary mouth. The water was turbid brown-green, visibility reduced to mere inches in the churning mixture of fresh and salt water. As the sun descended toward the horizon, fading light further compromised visibility. Waves broke irregularly across the sandbar where current met incoming swells. Mara Knight was 28, a fitness trainer who spent her free time spearfishing along the South African coast. She had been diving recreationally for several years and considered herself competent in reading ocean conditions. That afternoon, she arrived at the estuary with 2 friends who shared her enthusiasm for spearfishing. The post-storm conditions had concentrated fish in the shallows, and despite poor visibility, the group decided to take advantage of the unusual activity. Her companions remained closer to shore while Mara ventured toward the estuary mouth, where the current was stronger and the water deeper. The decision to dive at dusk following a major storm represented a convergence of risk factors that experienced ocean users typically avoid. Estuaries are natural highways for sharks moving between offshore and inshore feeding zones, and bull sharks in particular exploit these transitional environments. The reduced salinity does not deter them. They are among the few shark species capable of tolerating brackish and freshwater conditions. The turbidity eliminated the primary advantage humans have underwater, the ability to see threats approaching. Mara continued working the channel edge, her spear gun loaded, a stringer of bleeding fish secured to her weight belt. Bull sharks are among the most dangerous predators in coastal waters, ranking behind only great white and tiger sharks in recorded attacks on humans. They are stocky, aggressive, and opportunistic, reaching lengths of 11 feet and weights exceeding 500 pounds. Unlike many shark species that prefer clear water and specific prey, bull sharks thrive in murky environments where their electroreceptive senses compensate for limited visibility. They hunt by detecting electrical impulses generated by muscle contractions and can locate struggling or injured prey from considerable distances. Their bite force exceeds 1,200 pounds per square inch, and their teeth are designed to grip and tear rather than slice cleanly. Bull sharks typically deliver a single forceful bite, driven by sensory confusion, then disengage upon recognizing unfamiliar prey. Mara tracked a small grouper along the sandy bottom near the channel edge, the water depth approximately 12 feet. The current pushed against her as she descended, equalizing pressure and scanning the limited visibility ahead. Her finger rested near the trigger of the loaded spear gun as she maneuvered through the surge. In the murky water, she failed to detect a large shape moving parallel to her position. Her trailing spear line snagged momentarily on a submerged obstacle, jerking the gun forward just as her finger made contact with the trigger. The spear discharged into the turbid water, striking a massive bull shark that had approached from her blind side. The spear penetrated the thick hide but lodged only superficially along the flank. The wound was non-lethal, but the sudden pain triggered an immediate defensive response. The shark had been drawn by the scent of blood from the fish on Mara's stringer and the electrical signals of her movements. The impact transformed the situation from investigative approach to direct confrontation. The shark turned abruptly, its body language shifting from exploratory to aggressive. Rather than retreating to the surface and exiting the water immediately, Mara attempted to retrieve the spear, reaching toward the trailing line. The bull shark accelerated from deeper water with explosive speed, closing the distance in seconds. The attack was a single, devastating strike aimed at the lower body. The jaws opened wide, revealing rows of serrated triangular teeth, and clamped down with crushing force across the upper thigh and hip junction. The bite likely severed or catastrophically damaged the femoral artery, along with other major blood vessels, tearing through massive sections of muscle tissue and connective structures. The teeth penetrated deep into the thigh and hip region, causing devastating injury to blood vessels, nerves, and bone. The shark released almost immediately after the initial bite, veering away as surface activity increased and the water filled with blood. Bull sharks typically do not sustain attacks on humans. They bite once to assess whether the target is suitable prey, then disengage when they recognize the unfamiliar composition. But the damage from that single bite was irreversible. Blood poured from the wound in pulsing streams, the compromised femoral artery pumping the body's entire volume into the surrounding water within minutes. Mara surfaced briefly, the buoyancy of her wetsuit bringing her to the top, but the massive blood loss had already begun shutting down vital systems. Her companions saw the disturbance and began moving toward her position, but the distance and current worked against them. Consciousness faded rapidly as blood pressure dropped to unsustainable levels. The body's compensatory mechanisms attempted to redirect remaining blood to vital organs, but the volume loss was too severe and too rapid. Within minutes of the bite, circulatory collapse followed. Mara's body drifted with the outgoing tide, the current carrying her toward deeper water before her friends could reach her. The entire sequence from strike to loss of vital function likely unfolded within just a few minutes. The cause of death was massive hemorrhage resulting from a single catastrophic bite that severed or catastrophically damaged major blood vessels in the lower body. Emergency services were contacted immediately, and a rescue boat launched from the nearby harbor. Mara's body was recovered approximately 20 minutes after the attack, but resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful due to the extent of blood loss. The beach was closed for 72 hours, while authorities assessed the situation and monitored for continued shark presence in the estuary. An investigation by the Regional Marine Safety Board confirmed the attack was consistent with bull shark behavior in post-storm conditions with poor visibility and speared fish present. Mara's family requested no retaliatory action against sharks. The spearfishing community responded with heightened awareness of diving dangers in turbid water during dawn and dusk, and local dive operators began emphasizing the importance of avoiding estuary mouths after heavy rainfall. It was March 2015 in the Sundarbans buffer zone, a vast expanse of mangrove forests and tidal waterways straddling the border between India and Bangladesh. This UNESCO World Heritage Site encompasses nearly 4,000 square miles of dense vegetation, intersected by countless channels that flood and drain with the rhythm of the tides. The mangroves grow in thick, impenetrable walls, their roots creating a labyrinth above and below the waterline. Visibility within the cane thickets rarely exceeds a few meters, and the constant rustle of leaves and movement of water masks the sounds of approaching animals. During high tide, much of the forest floor becomes submerged, compressing wildlife movement into narrow corridors of elevated ground and forcing predators and prey into closer proximity than either would normally tolerate. Nola Vance was 32 years old, a wildlife photographer from the United Kingdom who had traveled to the Sundarbans under special permission to document a sanctioned wild boar control operation alongside forest personnel. The region had experienced increased human-wildlife conflict in recent months, with livestock losses attributed to a displaced tigress that had been sighted multiple times near village boundaries. She had joined a team of local trackers who knew the area intimately and understood the patterns of animal movement through the tidal forests. The group had positioned themselves along a tidal creek early that morning, waiting for the outgoing tide to concentrate animal activity along predictable routes. Recent reports indicated that the tigress responsible for the livestock attacks had been moving through the buffer zone with at least one cub, possibly two. Fresh pug marks had been discovered along muddy banks, and partially consumed prey remains suggested the animals were actively hunting within a defined territory. The trackers had warned the group to remain together and avoid entering dense cane without visual contact with at least one other person. High tide that morning had pushed water deep into the forest, and as it began to recede, the compression of usable terrain created ideal ambush conditions. The Bengal tiger is the apex predator of the Sundarbans, a solitary hunter capable of taking down prey many times its own weight. Adult females typically weigh between 250 and 350 pounds, though individuals in the Sundarbans tend toward the smaller end of that range due to the challenging environment and limited prey availability. Tigers are ambush predators, relying on cover to approach within striking distance before launching attacks that can cover 20 feet in a single bound. Their primary killing method involves a bite to the neck or throat, delivered with canine teeth that can exceed 3 inches in length. Jaw pressure is sufficient to crush vertebrae and collapse airways, often combining mechanical damage with asphyxiation. Female tigers with cubs are among the most dangerous animals on Earth, responding to perceived threats with immediate and overwhelming force. The morning had progressed without incident until Nola realized she had dropped a lens cap while repositioning along the creek bank. The item had fallen into a section of dense cane approximately 30 meters from where the trackers had paused. Rather than waiting for the group to move together, Nola made the decision to retrieve the equipment alone. She entered the cane thicket, pushing through the dense stalks that closed behind her, eliminating sightlines in all directions. She located the lens cap within moments and bent to retrieve it. What she did not see were the faint impressions in the mud nearby, small pug marks indicating that a tiger cub had been resting in this exact location less than an hour earlier. The tigress had been tracking human movement from the moment the group entered her territory. She had moved her cub to a more secure location, but remained nearby, monitoring the situation from deep cover within the cane. When Nola separated from the group and entered the thicket alone, approaching the area where the cub had recently rested, the tigress interpreted this as a direct threat. She closed the distance through the cane with absolute silence, her striped coat providing perfect camouflage against the vertical patterns of light and shadow. The attack came from behind, the preferred angle for tigers hunting in dense cover. The tigress launched from less than 10 feet away, covering the distance in a fraction of a second. Her front paws struck Nola's back with overwhelming body weight and momentum, driving her forward and down into the mud. Before any defensive response was possible, the jaws closed around the back of the neck. The canine teeth penetrated deeply, 2 on either side of the cervical spine. The bite was delivered with precision, targeting the gap between vertebrae. Crushing pressure bore down on the cervical vertebrae, fracturing bone and compressing the spinal cord within. The airway collapsed under the force of the bite, cutting off oxygen flow. Major cervical blood vessels, including the carotid artery and jugular vein, were compressed and damaged by the enormous pressure. The combined effects of spinal compression, airway obstruction, and vascular damage began shutting down consciousness. Nola remained aware for several seconds, unable to move or breathe, her body pinned beneath the weight of the predator. The pressure on her neck was absolute and unrelenting. Blood flow to the brain diminished rapidly as the carotid artery collapsed under the bite force. Between 5 and 10 seconds after initial contact, oxygen deprivation and loss of cerebral blood flow pushed her beyond consciousness. The tigress maintained her crushing grip, her body weight preventing any movement. Death followed within the next minute as the combination of spinal trauma, asphyxiation, and vascular collapse proved irreversible. The cause of death was a fatal cervical bite resulting in vertebral crushing, spinal cord compression, airway obstruction, and catastrophic vascular injury. The tigress released her grip and remained motionless for several moments, her breathing controlled, her eyes scanning the surrounding cane. She listened for sounds of approach, assessing whether other threats remained in the vicinity. After nearly a minute of stillness, she gripped the body by the shoulder and began dragging it toward deeper cover, moving in the direction of tidal water, where concealment would be more complete. The behavior was not driven by hunger, but by the instinct to remove threats from the vicinity of her cub. Tigers often cache kills or drag them to secure locations, even when they have no intention of consuming them. The trackers heard the brief disturbance and immediately recognized the sound pattern. They approached cautiously, calling out and making noise to announce their presence. The tigress abandoned the body and retreated into the mangroves, her primary objective achieved. Recovery operations were complicated by the terrain and the confirmed presence of a defensive tigress in the immediate area. Local wildlife authorities were notified, and a team arrived within hours to assess the situation. The incident was classified as a defensive attack by a female protecting cubs, with the victim's separation from the group and inadvertent approach to a cub resting site identified as the primary trigger. Nola's family was notified through the British consulate, and her body was repatriated following completion of the investigation. Area patrols were increased in the buffer zone, and additional warnings were posted regarding the presence of a tigress with cubs using the tidal corridors.
On the crisp morning of September 16, 2011, the forest straddling the Montana-Idaho border seemed timeless. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of damp soil and pine needles. Sunlight filtered softly through the towering trees, painting the forest floor with shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was serene, almost unnervingly so. The only sounds were the faint rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. Beneath this peaceful veneer, however, lay the potential for danger. For 39-year-old Steve Stevenson, this was the wilderness he cherished. A devoted husband and father of 2 daughters aged 14 and 10, Steve was the embodiment of dedication. During the work week, he labored as a miner with Highcraft Mining, extracting silver and gold from the earth, but his weekends belonged to the outdoors. A seasoned hunter and hiker, Steve was deeply connected to the land. Those who knew him spoke of his warmth and selflessness. He often took younger or less experienced hunters under his wing, eager to share his passion for nature. This trip was meant to be an escape from the routine, a chance to enjoy camaraderie and the thrill of the hunt. Joining him was 20-year-old Ty Bell, a fellow hunter and friend from their hometown of Winnemucca, Nevada. The 2 men had joined a larger group of hunters, each with valid permits to pursue black bears in the region. The rugged terrain offered ample opportunities for their quarry, but it also held risks. This was grizzly country, home to one of the most powerful and unpredictable predators in North America. Grizzlies, though protected under federal law, had been the subject of overhunting for decades, reducing their population to critically low levels by the mid-20th century. Thanks to conservation efforts, their numbers had slowly recovered, but sightings remained rare. Hunters were required to take bear identification courses to distinguish between black bears and their larger cousins. However, in the dense, shadowy forest, identifying a bear in the split second before firing could be nearly impossible. By mid-morning, the group had ventured several miles into the wilderness near the Idaho-Montana state line, deep within a rugged backcountry area known as Scout Ridge. The area was known for its challenging terrain, steep ridges, thick underbrush, and dense forest that limited visibility to just a few feet in places. Its remote location made it an area few ventured into without preparation. Even for experienced hunters like Steve and Ty, the isolation meant that help was hours away if anything went wrong. Still, Steve and Ty, eager to increase their chances of success, decided to split off from the main group. It was a strategy they had employed before: cover more ground, then regroup at the end of the day. The terrain was challenging, with dense forest and patches of huckleberries, known to attract both black bears and the rarer grizzlies that inhabited the area. As they climbed a ridge to scout the area, their conversation was light, tinged with the anticipation of a successful hunt. The ridge offered a sweeping view of the valley below, its dense canopy stretching into the horizon. Both men, being experienced hunters, had discussed their plans before they split off from the group. If they encountered a grizzly, they agreed they would retreat and try again another day, knowing that grizzlies were larger, more aggressive, and far more dangerous than the black bears they were permitted to hunt. This wasn't an idle precaution. Earlier in the day, they had seen signs of grizzlies in the area, claw marks on trees and overturned logs where the bears foraged for insects. These were clear indicators that they weren't alone in the forest. It was Ty who first spotted movement. A flash of dark fur against the underbrush caught his attention. The bear moved low to the ground, likely foraging for berries or roots. Ty raised his rifle, steadying his aim through the scope. In the fleeting moment, he was confident it was a black bear, a legal target. He squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle rang through the trees, and the bear staggered before bolting into the thick woods. The 2 men waited as protocol dictated. 15 minutes passed in tense silence. A wounded animal was the most dangerous kind, its instincts sharpened by fear and pain. Hunters in Montana are strongly advised to exercise caution when approaching wounded wildlife, as animals that are not fully deceased can become highly unpredictable and dangerous. While there is no specific law mandating a waiting period after a shot, Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Park emphasizes the importance of allowing enough time for an animal to succumb to its injuries before following a blood trail. Despite their experience, Steve and Ty decided to follow the blood trail after just 15 minutes, unknowingly placing themselves in a perilous position. The dense forest limited visibility and concealed the grizzlies' movements. The trail led them into denser, darker parts of the woods, where sunlight barely penetrated. The stillness around them felt oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. What they didn't know was that their target wasn't a black bear at all. It was a grizzly, one of only 45 known to dwell in the Cabinet Yaak ecosystem. At an estimated 400 pounds, it was smaller than some of its kind, but still a powerful predator. Grizzlies are known for their aggression when threatened, and this one had been provoked. The trail suddenly ended in a thicket of trees. Steve and Ty heard it before they saw it, the low, guttural sound of a bear's growl, followed by the unmistakable crunch of twigs underfoot. Then, from the shadows, the grizzly emerged. It was battered but alive, its deep-set eyes locking onto the hunters. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then the bear charged. The men reacted instantly, raising their rifles and firing. The shots rang out, but the grizzly didn't falter. Fueled by adrenaline and rage, it barreled forward. Steve, seeing the bear was fixated on Ty, made a split-second decision. Shouting and waving his arms, he positioned himself between the bear and his younger companion. It was a selfless act, one that spoke to Steve's character. The bear's attention shifted. It lunged at Steve, knocking him to the ground. Ty, now frantic, fired shot after shot at the animal. The grizzly's powerful jaws clamped down on Steve's leg, and its claws tore through his flesh. Steve fought back with every ounce of strength he had, but the bear's weight was overwhelming. Ty's hands trembled as he reloaded his rifle, his heart pounding in his chest. In the chaos, one of Ty's shots struck Steve in the chest. It's unclear whether the bullet ricocheted off the bear or hit Steve directly, but the result was devastating. Moments later, the bear collapsed from its wounds, its massive body slumping lifelessly beside Steve. Ty rushed to his friend's side, assessing his injuries. Steve lay motionless, blood pooling around him. Amidst the claw wounds and deep lacerations, Ty noticed a gunshot wound to the chest. The realization set in. One of his own bullets had struck Steve during the attack. With the other members of their hunting party far off and unaware of the situation, Ty made a desperate call to emergency services, his voice shaking as he relayed their location. The remote nature of the forest posed significant challenges for the rescue team. Ty stayed with Steve until help arrived, scanning the silent forest around him with his rifle close at hand, unsure if other predators might approach. Hours passed before a helicopter finally reached Scout Ridge. Steve's body was airlifted from the scene and taken to Lincoln County authorities. An autopsy later confirmed that while the bear's attack had inflicted severe injuries, it was the gunshot wound that had ultimately caused Steve's death. The grizzly was taken to a lab in Bozeman for examination, where wildlife officials confirmed it was a male, estimated to be 6 to 8 years old. Its death became another dark reminder of the fine line between human activity and the unpredictable forces of nature in these shared landscapes. For Ty Bell, the tragedy was a heavy burden to bear. Though no charges were filed against him, authorities ruled the incident an accident. He was haunted by the knowledge that his actions, however unintentional, had taken his friend's life. The emotional toll was immense, a weight he would carry for the rest of his days. In Winnemucca, the community mourned the loss of Steve Stevenson. Friends and family remembered him as a kind-hearted man who lived with integrity and courage. His daughters, left without their father, would grow up with memories of a man who loved them fiercely and who died trying to protect someone else. In early February 1939, the wilderness of Prince of Wales Island in southeastern Alaska lay cloaked in the stark silence of winter. Towering evergreens dominated the landscape, their branches heavy with snow. The icy waters of the Thorn River wound their way through this rugged terrain, reflecting the pale gray sky. At over 2,500 square miles, Prince of Wales Island is a vast, untamed expanse of dense forests, jagged mountains, and winding waterways. For centuries, it had been home to an array of wildlife, including black bears, Sitka black-tailed deer, and the elusive Alexander Archipelago wolf. For 40-year-old Christ Colby, this remote corner of the world was a second home. An experienced outdoorsman and trapper from Ketchikan, Christ was known for his self-reliance and deep connection to the land. He had spent countless seasons navigating Alaska's unforgiving wilderness, living off the land and mastering its rhythms. Trapping was not just a livelihood for Christ, it was a way of life, one that offered the solitude and adventure he craved. In February, Christ prepared for another long trapping season. His destination was a small cabin near the headwaters of the Thorn River, a spot he had used in previous seasons as a base for his work. He packed provisions to last several months, his trapping gear, and his newest acquisition, a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver. This top-of-the-line firearm, relatively new to the market at the time, reflected Christ's understanding of the dangers that came with living in the Alaskan wild. The revolver was both a tool and a safeguard, essential for a man accustomed to the unpredictability of nature. The journey to the cabin was arduous. Christ trudged through deep snow, following the river upstream for miles. When he finally arrived, the familiar sight of the small wooden cabin must have been a relief. Nestled among the trees, it offered shelter and a place to regroup before venturing out into the surrounding wilderness. Christ quickly settled into his routine. Each morning he would head out to check his trap lines, which he had carefully set along the Thorn River. The work was physically demanding, but Christ thrived in the isolation and the challenge of trapping animals for their furs. For weeks, the wilderness followed its natural rhythms, and Christ worked steadily. His traps yielded a bounty of furs, which he skillfully prepared back at the cabin. The long days were punctuated by the crackle of the fire, the howl of the distant wolves, and the occasional flutter of wings as ravens circled above. The wolves on Prince of Wales Island, part of the Alexander Archipelago subspecies, were typically shy and elusive. They preyed on the island's abundant Sitka black-tailed deer and rarely posed a threat to humans. But the winter had been long and food sources were likely dwindling, driving the predators to take risks they might not have otherwise. On March 2nd, Christ's routine took a tragic turn. That morning, he left the cabin with his usual supplies, a pack with food, his knife secured to his belt, and his prized revolver holstered at his side. The snow was beginning to melt and the forest showed the first signs of spring. It seemed like any other day, but Christ would never return to the cabin. Months passed without word from him. In Ketchikan, his absence initially caused little concern. It wasn't unusual for Christ to spend extended periods in the wilderness without communication. However, by July, his friends grew worried. When he failed to return as expected, they reported his disappearance to the authorities. The U.S. Commissioner dispatched 2 men to search for him. They found his cabin undisturbed, with no signs of a struggle or abrupt departure. His rowboat remained tied along the riverbank unused. Unable to locate Christ and hindered by the dense summer foliage, the searchers returned to Ketchikan with his belongings, leaving his fate a mystery. Unsatisfied with the inconclusive outcome of the initial search, Christ's friends organized a more extensive expedition in late October 1939. Led by former game warden W.R. Selfridge, the search party included Vic Hotop, W.A. Miller, and M. Walker, all determined to uncover what had happened to their missing friend. The group followed the Thorn River to Christ's base of operations, an old cabin situated approximately 10 miles upstream. Upon reaching the cabin on October 30th, they found it undisturbed, with no immediate clues to Christ's fate. From there, they began a systematic search of the surrounding area. After several days of combing the wilderness, their efforts were rewarded with grim discoveries on November 5th. Scattered across the site near the shoreline of a lake were torn pieces of clothing, bone fragments, and a nearly complete human skull. Among the evidence, they found Christ's sheathed knife, its handle marked with deep wolf bite impressions suggesting a desperate struggle. The revolver Christ had carried with him was also found nearby, still holstered and secured to a belt with visible teeth marks on the leather. The revolver was unloaded, and closer inspection revealed a broken main spring, rendering it unusable. Cartridges were discovered in Christ's pocket, indicating that he had been aware of the gun's malfunction before he left the cabin, but had chosen to carry it regardless, likely out of habit. Without a functional firearm, Christ would have had to rely solely on his knife for defense. The items recovered told a harrowing story of survival and desperation, with the bite-marked knife standing as a testament to his fight against the wolves. Additional evidence included a torn shirt sleeve cuff, a coat, and bones scattered across a 100-foot radius, with some remains found submerged just off the lake's shore. Based on the evidence, investigators theorized that Christ had been attacked by a pack of wolves. The Alexander Archipelago wolves that inhabit Prince of Wales Island are a subspecies of the gray wolf, smaller but highly intelligent and coordinated hunters. These wolves, weighing between 60 and 120 pounds, typically rely on Sitka black-tailed deer as their primary food source. However, the harsh winter of 1939 may have depleted their usual prey, driving the pack to target Christ instead. Wolf attacks on humans are exceedingly rare, and at the time of Christ's death, no fatalities from wolf attacks had been documented in Alaska. Wolves generally avoid humans, preferring to retreat rather than engage, but hunger can push even the most cautious predators to act out of character. The isolated location of Christ's cabin, coupled with the lean winter months, created the perfect storm for this rare and tragic event. The details of what happened in those final moments remain speculative, but the evidence told a clear enough story. Christ's revolver, broken and unloaded, offered no protection. The knife, unsheathed and marked with wolf bites, suggested he had fought valiantly to defend himself. The scattered remains indicated a chaotic and violent struggle. Despite his experience and resourcefulness, Christ was overpowered by the wolves, and his body was left to the elements and scavengers. Christ's remains were brought back to Ketchikan, where he was laid to rest. At the site of the discovery, the search team left a simple handwritten memorial, marking the location where their friend had met his tragic end. Christ's story remains one of the only documented fatal wolf attacks in North America, an extraordinary and rare occurrence that highlights the unforgiving nature of the wilderness. Even for someone as skilled and prepared as Christ Colby, the untamed forces of nature proved insurmountable. Prince of Wales Island remains a haven for outdoor adventures, its dense forest and abundant wildlife drawing visitors from across the world. Yet the island's beauty is matched by its danger, a truth that Christ Colby's unfortunate story illustrates with chilling clarity. On June 22, 1892, the high desert of Chihuahua, Mexico, stretched out endlessly under the unrelenting sun. The vast plains and rugged canyons stretched over 100,000 square miles, but were sparsely populated with human settlements few and far between. Among these outposts was Colinia Pacheco, a small Mormon settlement established by families who had fled persecution in the United States. The Neagle family was among them, working tirelessly to establish a foothold in the unforgiving wilderness. Brothers Hiram, 22, and George Neagle, just 18, had been tasked with maintaining one of their family's ranches outside the colony. It was hard, isolating work, but Hiram, the elder of the two, approached it with determination. The brothers were no strangers to the challenges of ranch life, from unpredictable weather to the ever-present threat of predators. They had grown up in these conditions, learning to rely on their wits and each other to survive. Chihuahua's wilderness was home to a host of wildlife, But none posed as great a threat as the Mexican grizzly bear. Towering over 6 feet on its hind legs and weighing up to 600 pounds, the grizzly ruled as the apex predator of the region. Its immense strength, sharp claws, and powerful bite, delivered with 3-inch-long teeth, made it a creature to be feared and respected. By 1892, the grizzly population was already in decline due to overhunting and habitat loss, but in this corner of the desert they still roamed. The Nagels' troubles began when they noticed their livestock disappearing. Over several weeks, they found the remains of goats and cattle scattered across the property, their carcasses bearing the unmistakable signs of bear attacks. The losses were substantial, and the brothers knew they had to act. One evening, Hiram spotted a massive grizzly near the ranch while returning from the river. It was clear this bear was responsible, and it had grown bold enough to come dangerously close to their home. Determined to protect their ranch, Hiram and George armed themselves with rifles and set out to track the bear. They rode on horseback for miles, following the trail of destruction the predator had left behind. The tracks led them along the Gavilan River and eventually to a canyon flanked by rugged hills. Scattered among the tracks were the remains of livestock, grisly evidence of the bear's rampage. As the brothers pressed on, they decided to split up to increase their chances of spotting the animal. George rode ahead, scanning the rocky terrain for any sign of movement. It wasn't long before he saw it, a hulking brown figure moving in the distance. He shouted for Hiram, and the brothers quickly regrouped. Dismounting their horses, they raised their rifles and took aim. The first volley of gunfire rang out, with Hiram firing several shots into the bear's torso and legs. George aimed for the head but missed. The bear, wounded but still alive, let out a deep bellow of pain and began limping away, retreating into the canyon. Determined to finish the job, the brothers pursued it, pausing only when George's rifle jammed, the cartridge stuck in the chamber. As he worked to fix it, Hiram moved ahead, confident the bear was mortally wounded. Moments later, George heard 3 more gunshots echo through the canyon. Assuming Hiram had fired the final kill shots, George hurried after him. But as he reached the hilltop, he saw no sign of his brother, only the bear's tracks continuing deeper into the canyon. Alarmed, George called out Hiram's name, his voice carrying over the stillness of the desert. No response came. Then, in the distance, he saw it, the bear, still alive, crouched over something on the ground. A sickening realization washed over him as he spotted a torn blue shirt just feet from the animal. His brother was down, and the bear was still alive. The bear, with bloodied jaws, had attacked Hiram. George screamed, trying to scare it off. For a moment, the bear retreated, allowing George to rush to his brother's side. Hiram was barely conscious, his body a horrifying mess of injuries. His right hand had been completely severed. Bite marks covered his neck, and his scalp had been peeled back, exposing puncture wounds to his skull. Blood soaked his torso where deep claw marks had torn through flesh and muscle. Through labored breaths, Hiram managed to recount what had happened. As he approached the bear on foot with his horse, thinking it was dead, the animal suddenly lunged at him. It had been lying in wait, feigning death to ambush its attackers. His horse had bolted, leaving him with no way out. Hiram's frantic attempts to fire his rifle were in vain, as the bear's immense strength overpowered him. It had bitten into his neck and chest, pinning him to the ground. Before George could process the horror of his brother's injuries, he heard movement behind him. The bear was returning. Grabbing his rifle, he aimed as the animal charged. This time, the shot hit its mark, striking the bear in the thigh. The massive creature staggered and tried to climb a tree, but collapsed from its injuries. George approached cautiously, firing one final round into the bear's head to ensure it was dead. With the threat neutralized, George turned his attention back to Hiram. Realizing the urgency of the situation, he fashioned makeshift bandages and a tourniquet to slow the bleeding. Using his hat, he fetched water from the river to clean the wounds. The brothers were 15 miles from the ranch, deep in the wilderness, and the nearest help was much farther away. George knew he had to get Hiram home if there was any chance of saving him. Wrapping Hiram in blankets and securing him on his horse, George began the long and grueling journey back to the ranch. Hiram slipped in and out of consciousness, his strength fading with each passing mile. George walked alongside the horse, urging it forward through the dark, treacherous terrain. The brothers reached the ranch hours later, but Hiram's condition had deteriorated severely. Infection had set in, and without antibiotics, still decades from being discovered, there was little hope. The family decided to take Hiram to a nearby town in a desperate bid to find medical help. Doctors from neighboring areas arrived, doing everything they could to treat his injuries, but their efforts were in vain. Over the next 2 days, the infection spread and Hiram's condition worsened. At 10 p.m. on the night of June 24, 1892, surrounded by his family, Hiram succumbed to his injuries. Hiram's death was a devastating blow to the Neagle family and the tight-knit community of Colonia Pacheco. At just 22 years old, he had displayed remarkable courage and resilience, facing a predator that few could survive. The Mexican grizzly that killed him was one of the last of its kind, a species driven to extinction by 1964. Today, the story of Hiram and George Neagle endures as a harrowing reminder of the dangers faced by settlers in the wilderness. Though the Mexican grizzly is now gone, the canyons and rivers of Chihuahua remain, silent witnesses to a battle that claimed the life of one young man and forever changed the life of another.
Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.